This is a pretty edgy episode for me today. I haven't chosen a title yet, so hopefully that will emerge. But I have with me a very special person here today to discuss the topic of Jesus, among other things.
Wow.
I think that's what we connected on, decided
Yeah.
to discuss. So my guest today is Reverend Dr. Ian Meverak. He is a spiritual seeker and community builder who is deeply engaged in the work of social and personal transformation. He holds a BA in philosophy from Middlebury College and an MDiv and PhD in theology and ethics from BU. For the past decade, he has served as the founding director of the Common Street Spiritual Center in Natick, Massachusetts, and most recently, he became the director of the Spiritual Life at Curry College. Ian, I'm so excited to have you here today, both for your depth of wisdom and knowledge and education, but also for your amazing heart. And I can't wait to see what comes out of this conversation, because as I shared with you before we hit record, I never intended to have this conversation publicly. I never even had a concept that I would ever get to a place in my lifetime where I would have the interest or desire to discuss Jesus, let alone talk publicly about it. So thank you for creating this space for us to explore it and hopefully invite some deeper introspection for our audience to think about Jesus in a way that maybe they've never thought about Jesus before. So welcome, Ian.
Thank you so much, Becca. It is such a pleasure to be in this conversation with you. And as you know, I've been a fan of your podcast, so I've heard many of the podcasts. And so it's fun to be in one and get this chance to explore a topic that's near and dear to me, very complicated, very fun. You could see it from a million ways. And it's exciting that you're opening this space to speak about Jesus in this way that you want to, that your path has taken you to. It's very exciting, especially as a Jewish person.
I'm just grinning ear to ear. I just can't believe it. If you asked me 6 months ago, I'd be like, why talk about Jesus? I associated the name with Christianity, Catholicism, religion, period. And that was the end of it.
What changed?
What changed? To be totally transparent, years ago, I dated somebody who was very dedicated to reading the Bible, and it bothered me the way he shared it with me, the way he really wanted me to embrace it. And I've always been open-minded. My Jewish secular parents raised me open-minded. And instead of shutting him down, I took a walk like I usually do. That's the way I pray. And I said, yo, Jesus, God, if you are out there, if you're a real thing, and if you are and you want me to connect to you, show me yourself. And it took years, but I came across a friend, a woman, a coach who is a Christian coach. And the way she talked about Jesus didn't feel, and all the descriptors I'm about to use are the way I felt growing up. The way she talked about Jesus didn't feel scary. It didn't feel deadly. It didn't feel religious. It didn't feel proselytizing. It didn't feel controlling or judgmental. It didn't feel like it, the way she spoke about it didn't separate people from each other. And all of those descriptors are how I felt Christianity and religion and Jesus Christ. That's how I experienced it. The way she talks about it is more from the Christ consciousness, which I had become familiar with through the New Age spiritual movement, but also felt really cheesy to me and unnecessary. I didn't know why we had to associate love and light with Christ. Again, I just felt like it was making this guy a celebrity. For what reason? Like, why is this one person so important? It felt very forced and unnatural to me. But I'm giving you a really long answer, so bear with me.
Good answer.
at a very young age, I went to a Catholic, I think it was Catholic, Catholic funeral for my friend, my classmate. She was 11 when she died. And it was my first wake. It was my first time seeing a dead person. And I wasn't expecting an open casket. It was terrifying. She had been a very sick kid, so it didn't look good. And when I got to her Catholic school ceremony, there was a huge crucifix in the hall. And I'd never seen one of those before. And that was terrifying to see this man, tortured and hung on the wall. And the priest proceeded during the ceremony to say that we would see her on the other side. And I was so confused, tormented even. And I remember going home after the funeral and taking a nap in my parents' bedroom and looking up at the wallpaper that had floral arrangements in the shape of diamonds. And my brain kept connecting all the diamonds to look like crosses. Like I was just really haunted by this image. And my mom took me to my rabbi, and he explained that we don't know what happens after we die, but different religions have different ideas. And this is what the Catholic idea is. And this is what the Jewish idea is. And that he can't claim to know. And none of us really can, but this is why he said what he said. And he calmed me down a bit, but that was the beginning of my experience with learning concepts that weren't at my temple. And having, lived a Jewish identity, still living a Jewish identity, it was very disorienting because most people tend to be towards the Christian faith, or let's say non-Jewish faith. Most people are not Jewish. Yeah. And so it always just felt like I'm not of them. Religion just always felt very separating to me. And the whole Jesus thing felt very strange because in Judaism, he's not a celebrity. He's not, anything to look up to. And so it just felt forced to me and unnatural. And I'm kind of at a lack for words, but I think I'm painting a clear enough picture for you that it just felt removed from me. And whenever I'd hear conversations about him, it would be connected with the church or with people who are proselytizing or trying to convert people. It felt like forcefulness. It felt like control. And, with the Jewish heritage, it also felt like death and murder. Yes. So there was never any desire to get close to this character. But back to answering your original question, this woman, this coach, she said, he is like kind of your relative. It's your ancestor. And then I started thinking, well, I'm into ancestry and lineage and heritage. And considering what I have heard about him that sounds historically true, we probably have a lot in common. So I said, Jesus, like community member, family member, if you want to connect to me, I'm here. And he has been showing up everywhere. And wow, I do, I'm a spiritual person, but I'm also a scientific person. So I recognize pattern recognition. I'm aware of pattern recognition. I'm aware of the RAS system, that our brain searches for patterns. And if I was saying that I'm praying to the color orange would show up everywhere. I'm aware of that. But the way it's showing up is so interesting. Like people mentioning him to me who we've never talked about it, or I'm in the woods all the time, seeing his face in a tree. Like, wow. I remember when I was a kid seeing some post on the internet about a woman seeing him in toast. Like now I'm the tree lady seeing Jesus in the tree. And I was driving the other day and I saw Becca B on a license plate. And then I look over in the next car, had like 2 Jesus stickers on it. And I'm just like, hi, like I see you. Or like I parked in Boston and I'd got this lucky spot because I've got good parking karma, and somebody pulled out and parked and there's a Jesus sticker right there. And again, it's not uncommon, but it's just showing up a lot more now that I'm thinking about it. And our conversation, right? This like total alignment of now I'm talking to other people who also have similar views, or at least more comfortable views so that I can start to have a conversation.
Absolutely. What a transformation in your relationship with Jesus. I love I love this concept of, claiming Jesus as an ancestor and connecting that way, like through the family, because it's so natural as opposed to supernatural. Almost like the Catholic Church is asking for this supernatural relationship with, life after death, and, all this theological and this powerful imagery, which, yeah, the crucifix you can almost never forget, but to have this like other way of connecting that's like so natural and through your own lineage, and more coming out of, spirituality that could be more indigenous in its style, or, more new age even, and threading a different path. It's really interesting. um I could share a little bit about my history too, because, um as you know, being half Jewish, half Catholic, similar to your experience, but I was doing that all the time as a kid, going from, Jewish context, then into the Catholic Church, and facing a lot of contradictions, um, from things like my dad being Jewish and wondering, well, are they really saying right now that he's going to hell, like this guy who's here, just to kind of keep us in good behavior in a church pew, and who's respectfully here? Are you really saying he's going to hell because he's not taking communion? So I had a lot of those basic questions, just about like, um, I I felt like I needed to get my own version of God. I was like, I just can't do it with this version. Either like Jewish people being the only ones chosen by God, or Catholics being the only ones saved by God, or, having these very sectarian definitions of God that just didn't fit together and didn't work for me, as being a person who, one parent Catholic, one Jewish. And so I knew I needed my own version of God, and then I did need my own version of Jesus. Similar problem, because the version of Jesus is all tied up with these questions. And for me, it was like my Jewish friends, anchoring me in that classic Jewish monotheism and saying like, well, Ian, like a human can't be God, right? Like God's invisible, etc. Like can't be killed. I was like, yeah, I get it, guys. Like, so like there was that version of monotheism, and then there was like the Catholic Church with the Trinity and Jesus. You're supposed to see Jesus as God, and worship him as an aspect of God, or one of the mystery of the three. So those weren't compatible. So, at a young age, um, I really processed a lot, with my family members and with friends, not so much my parents, but like my siblings and friends. And I was like, here's where I'm landing. Like, I think Jesus is great. And I can go so far as like Christ and Messiah, but not God. Like, that seems to go too far. So, like, to get these religions to just like fit and play well, this is where I'm landing. And
Amazing.
I landed there, and I think like there were other close friends, and like my siblings were like, yeah, that makes sense. But I did feel pretty alone with those beliefs, actually. um I was like, oh man, like, can I be like Catholic, but do I have to believe the Trinity? Is that like really needed? And they were like, yeah, it is. I remember like debating in religious ed about that, trying to get space for like beliefs that made sense to me and worked with all the different contexts I was in. And they weren't really about negotiating the creed with me. So that was tricky. I felt like I couldn't really fit as a Catholic. with that. And so after I was confirmed, I just became spiritual but not religious. But I still felt like really connected to Jesus in that, and really felt like I always felt like there was a difference between Jesus and Christianity. Like Christianity is like one thing, and as I've over the years I see this much more clearly, where it's like, well, Christianity is an institutional religion with many different forms and its own history, and Jesus is, a person. He was Jewish. He didn't even know about Christianity. He never even heard that word in his whole life, um, and didn't imagine that he'd have all of these non-Jewish followers, because in his own life, his followers are all Jewish, and he was a rabbi, and he was transforming the Jewish tradition, um, but definitely not aware of what would come. And it's interesting how Christians seem not to remember this. And sometimes Jesus can become more like just like a doctrinal reality, or like a mystical reality, or like a belief within the whole system, and like what's his role in bringing you to heaven, or what's his role in purifying you, forgiving you through this sacrifice. It's like very complicated, but it's kind of like, what does that really have to do though with Jesus though? He didn't know any of that, and he wasn't walking around teaching that type of thing. He was really really about caring for the poor, about love, about a lot of the themes of the Jewish prophets that they always spoke about: social justice, um, community, peace on earth. Some of like the really beautiful themes of the Jewish tradition. Um, Spiritual growth, things, things that things that are so different from what Christianity became, over time. It's strange that it became anti-Jewish, but it's understandable, not like excusable, but like in the Roman Empire, and in essentially in the Roman Empire, but before that, even like the Greek Empire, there was just a lot of anti-Semitism, and that was a major theme. And the Jewish culture was always so resilient and so resistant to oppression, and Jews had such a you know these stories of liberation and justice that they carried, and also their sense of being chosen by God, I think, gave them that chutzpah to keep rebelling all the time, and they were just hard to manage from an imperial perspective. And so, I think that's all part of why they always had so much anti-Semitism. And then I think when Christianity started to grow into this religion for non-Jews, maybe they were interested in Judaism at first, or interested in monotheism. It was kind of like the first non-Jewish Christians were the God-fearers, who were like involved in synagogue life, but on the periphery. And then, you know, as it grew more and more into a Gentile religion, the anti-Semitism kind of really creeped in. And, the passages in the New Testament that are critical of Jewish religious leaders and such, but are really like an internal conversation within the tradition. When you then take that and put that in the hands of non-Jews who may already be anti-Semitic, they completely change. And it has this tone of hatred and this kind of like willingness to like get revenge and destroy. that, was never in the original, because not only Jesus was Jewish, but also all of the writers of the New Testament were also Jewish. A little known fact, but they were all Jewish. So, if they're critiquing the religious leaders, but it's like, remember though, there are other Jewish religious leaders critiquing different sects. They're not saying all Jews are bad. But if you're reading it then from a Gentile lens and you forget that the authors are Jewish and forget that Jesus is Jewish, then the passages are very, very problematic. Many of them, not all, but probably a good enough amount that the New Testament needs to be read carefully.
Wow. Being a good listener, it's hard to keep track of all the points you made that I want to celebrate and pick apart, but I'm going to do my best here. You just shared so much. Firstly, I love the point you made, and it's been carried around in my mind forever, is would Jesus approve of Christianity? Because so much of Christianity is imposing and infiltrating culture with things that are anti-Jesus. And that's always been so confusing. And one of the reasons I couldn't take it seriously. And now I'm realizing it isn't him. Like, what I'm not taking seriously isn't the person. And I also reflected on, while you were talking about your early days of experiencing religion and the wisdom you had within yourself to question it and piece it together and share it with others and hear their feedback and hold so true to your own North Star is commendable and inspiring. And I think one of the reasons we connected so deeply is because we share the more, I don't want to say fringe idea, but true to us. Like, we seek and collect, and then we have our own experience with it. And I think we hold that in common, that we've never fully submitted to a doctrine or philosophy without first filtering it through our own heart and our own mind. And it's so enjoyable to hear you express that history, because I hadn't heard those pieces yet, but I did know when we first connected, you shared, I'm a Baptist minister. and I was sharing my ideas at the time of religion and spirituality, and you're like, yeah, totally on the same page. and I was so confused, because I thought about Baptist, like Southern church, like I love I love the imagery of Martin Luther King and the music and the hollering and hooting, and I love that. But I always thought about it as, again, just another Christian thing I couldn't relate to or would never believe in. So to hear it come out of your mouth, like just the gentleness and the humility and the detachment of what is, and the way your friends commented on how God can't get killed. What that reminded me of, and what I shared with you last time we spoke, is that not only have I rediscovered a new idea of Jesus that I'm starting to kind of piece together, but I've actually finally claimed God. And that was something I never did. I thought God was fabricated and God was a religious thing. And I love the idea God can't be killed, because God is a frequency. It's not, to me at least, and currently my current belief is God's not like a being, like it's not a creature, it's a frequency. And when I take it out of religion, I can embrace it. And it was the religious piece that really bothered me, because so much about religion is separating people, organizing people, telling them what to do, telling them what not to do. There being rules and fear and judgment and consequence. And the part that just bothers me the most is it keeps people away from each other. And when it's God is unity.
This is so true. You're in the sweet spot, Becca. This is the major problem I've always found with religion. What you just said is that it keeps people separate. It's got that sectarian divisiveness where it's like, did you purposely make these beliefs so that they would separate this group from this group? And they're like, yes. These beliefs are designed to invalidate these ones and these ones, and to cut these people off from those people, like right at the soul level. It's like right at the soul level. That's like a crime. You shouldn't be cutting people off from each other at the soul level. That's like it's very sad because that's where we can universally connect across like any other difference of culture or gender or class. It's like the soul level, we're all essentially the same. And like when I think about God, like I love what you said about frequency. I often think of like consciousness, and everyone has their own language, but it's like, isn't there like a universal consciousness that we wouldn't be able to be alive without?
Mm-hmm.
Like if a human being is alive and is a conscious being, it's like God's part of that. So each person is alive with God, and in their unique way. And we should all be able to connect at that, like see the sacredness of each other, see that we all are, like, even in any moment you're alive, you're connected all to the same source of life, or you wouldn't be having this experience. And somehow religions have taken that um, experience, the sacred experience, and I like to say they've kind of like tried to brand it.
Mm.
Like, this is, a trademarked experience that you're having. Like, you've reached this sacred experience in worship. We've sung all these songs, but like, this is the only way. And the other people doing this are evil. It's like, why can't we celebrate all of the paths that take us to that place within and help us really feel awe and appreciation and connectedness? And it's really just the patterns of humanity to be at war with each other, to see enemies, to create, exaggerated differences, to dehumanize other people so that you can then attack them and take their lands and enslave them. And it's those ancient patterns that religions get co-opted into, even though so often the founders are doing the opposite thing. So Jesus was like deconstructing those enemy images. He was a Jew, but he was like, here you're going to see me, with this Syrophoenician woman that, I should hate according to my culture, but who has now in this moment become my teacher. And I'm connecting with her. And she's part of my community. So he would be doing those kinds of things. He was really like trying to break down the boundaries. He'd be like, I'm going to even relate with this Roman soldier somehow. And we should hate the Roman soldier, because they're oppressing us. But what if I see the beauty of the Roman soldier as a person and like have this connection? We're like the rich person who is exploiting everybody. But what if like he's my friend and then I'm like, hey, forgive all the debts, and then he does it, and like, because he saw the humanity and saw like, I think he saw like the God in each person, um, which is really beautiful. And I'll tell you, it's a strange story how I became Baptist. But American Baptist rather than Southern, although I love my Southern Baptist brothers and sisters who are listening. Well, second largest religion in the country besides Catholicism. But I joined the American Baptist not only because of King, who was definitely someone I've been following, um, but also other leaders, Howard Thurman, Roger Williams, some of these great Baptists. But the big thing that drew me in was freedom of conscience. Now, not everyone knows this, but Baptists don't have a creed, they don't have required beliefs, and they allow you to define your own beliefs. They really believe in freedom of belief. So, of all the different Christian denominations, I felt like so connected to Jesus, but so kind of cynical about the different types of Christianity. But then when I found the Baptist, and they were like, yeah, you could basically just say what your specific beliefs are in your ordination process, and the people there will just vote on it and they'll decide whether it's okay or not. And like a handful of people did not vote for me because I did have all these non-conforming different beliefs. But like in the Baptist concept, you're allowed to have people who disagree, you're allowed to have minority opinions, you're allowed to have different views, and they just don't want to force anyone to believe anything that's just against their principles. So that's why I went on that path, and they really did give me the freedom to believe in multiple religions, and believe in a non-Trinitarian theology, and a low Christology, meaning not thinking Jesus is God with a capital G, and they allowed for all of that, and could say, yeah, we might not all believe the same way as you, but we accept that you believe in this manner. So that's why I went that way. And I really, at times, it's definitely been awkward to explain because I'm such a free thinker and more spiritual than religious in many ways. And I definitely have drawn some strange glances, but, or scared people with the label. But at the end of the day, they also, empowered me to start a pluralistic, multi-faith spiritual center. And when I had that idea, because I'd been asked to start a new church. And then I was like, oh, it's not only going to be an interfaith church, but I'm thinking spiritual center. I'm thinking we got to honor the spirit, the spiritual center within, and just create something that's never been seen, And when I told my Baptist executive minister, I was like, oh man, this is it, because they're going to kick me out for sure. I've crossed the line. I know I have. And I was so surprised because he was like, you've caught a fresh wind of the spirit. Go for it. And it really, it blew my mind. I was shocked because I didn't think they were really going to be all about soul freedom, all about freedom of conscience. I didn't think it was like going to really go down to the core. And I thought at the core, they're going to be like, no, it's all about like some evangelical principles, but it wasn't. And I was really surprised and really grateful for the integrity of my Baptist colleagues.
Wow. I think back to that rabbi I mentioned from my childhood, and he was the leader of a Reconstructionist temple. That's
Ooh.
the sect that I was raised in. And, Reconstructionist Judaism, a lot of the conversations around nature. I don't remember hearing God a lot. And that may be because when we said God, it was in Hebrew words. There's many words for God in Judaism. But I was raised and kind of walked out of high school into college thinking like, yeah, I love Judaism because you can believe whatever you want. Because that's what my rabbi told me. And I was up for a rude awakening when, the Jewish centers that are available on college campuses are Hillel or Chabad, the Reform or the Orthodox. And I tried them, and then that didn't work out. And I tried doing a couple Jewish electives around Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah, and that was really cool. But, I've lived all around the country. I've endured a large amount of anti-Semitism, and it kept coming back to, why do I have to be part of an organized thing? Like,
Mm,
I didn't have, I think, the strength of character and knowing that you did at an early age, like really taking it in and processing it. For me, it was much more, the imagery I have as I compare myself to you is like a ping pong ball. I was like trying that, no, trying that, no. Like I wasn't fully integrating it. I was just dabbling and kept walking away from things. But what really resonated was renewal Judaism, which goes
mm,
back to the land-based traditions
yes.
and Native American culture and the medicine wheel. Because, you know, more mystic Judaism, the more ancient land-based ways, we also had a medicine wheel. And
Mm,
I had the privilege of meeting shamans, you know, early in my adolescence and learning about the medicine wheel and the directions and different elements. And that always felt so true because the place I felt most me was out in nature. And so it
mm,
made more sense to pray out in nature. And through trial and error, I saw that prayers were answered or intentions were met and that synchronicities were happening. And so I ended up going more towards new age spirituality,
mm,
um, often when I was hitting a low and was
mm,
desperate or vulnerable. And these new age spiritual ideas were so grandiose and so self-empowering, really kind of narcissistic. And then I healed enough to be able to have a clearer lens about what was really going on and wanting to, you know, not wanting to perpetuate those new age ideas, because to me it kind of wipes out true community and the
mm,
collective. It you talk about unity consciousness, but it feels like the themes are so often about the self. And
mm,
um and even when you were talking about how people misplace what Jesus was really standing for, and then they're using his name, you know, in relationship to what he's not standing for. I'm also thinking about how they're like, yeah, Jesus will save me. It's all about me and
mm,
not as much about like the community and true unity. Um, but when I was really starting to come out of the new age stuff, um, you know, I was a tarot reader
mm,
and you know, even identified as a professional psychic. And it felt dark at times because I could feel the
mm,
pain in the people coming to me. And it felt like I wanted to be responsible with these gifts, which I still own, but don't really offer to people. Not in that way of disempowering them with future predictions and that sort of thing. But I remember seeing when I was starting to come out of it, or maybe when I was still doing it, um, videos of other women saying, I used to read tarot cards, but I was saved by Jesus.
mm,
And I see the light now, and me being like, whoa, polarity, and like neither one of these feel right. And I want nothing to do with either. Um, and as you know, I'm an astrologer and I still have my cards packed away in my office. And um, they are real tools. And, you know, what I saw was real and the predictions do come true. But to
mm,
me, I mean, the fear mongering in organized religion against these divination practices, I think I used to claim were because they didn't want people to be empowered. They didn't want people to feel their own sense of godliness within. They wanted them to go to the church, go to the
right.
pastor, go to the priest to feel like then they can connect to, I don't know, the hierarchy from Jesus to the God, you know, the Trinity. I don't know exactly how it works, but all this to say,
Mm,
um, there's so much judgment out there. And what I love when I hear you talk about spirituality and God and religion is just this gentleness and purity and openness. And um, I don't have the education you do and the
mm,
background you do and all the historical facts, but I can say that today I'm able to really hold all of this with a softness, um, and a sense of ownership, where before it felt outside of me and like these concepts. I do feel like I'm fully in touch with God now, and I do feel like I have wisdom to share in the area and the
mm.
topic. But I actually purchased a Bible the other day.
Wow.
And I asked my mom for a copy of the Torah because she had one. And I downloaded an audiobook on the Bhagavad Gita. How do you say it?
Bhagavad Gita.
Bhagavad Gita. Ah! And I'm realizing, like, if I'm going to be a spiritual leader, if I'm really gonna support people in this area, I probably should have the context to not even the origins, but like the historical context of it all, because obviously the origins are unwritten.
Yes.
Like, right? Like, the books don't make God. It's just people's interpretation of what they were experiencing. And another reason I always resisted Christianity and religion, for me, again, like, Judaism wasn't so religious for me growing up. It was a very different thing. But as an adult, I can see that it is a religion. My experience of it wasn't everyone's experience of it, but that all of these books were written by human beings. So there's room for error and bias. But something I read at the beginning of the Torah copy my mom gave me is that historically, this is what the book said, 99.9% of the written records across the world actually validate each other.
Oh, yeah.
So to me, like, there's no argument there.
Yeah. I mean, the scriptures are pretty accurate in terms of being copies of the originals. I want to tie something you said back into this Jesus conversation, because you were talking about being, a new age healer and psychic and having real spiritual gifts, and meeting people one-on-one. And then that tension with religion, where religion's they don't want to see people that empowered, and they want people to go through their process. So guess who had the same tension? Jesus. Because he was actually a one-on-one healer. And a lot of his ministry was hands-on healing, what we might think of as Reiki, something like that. And almost one-on-one counseling, you might say, forgiving people, helping them restore their faith or change their lives. He was always trying to he was talking about the kingdom of God, which was this community, the reign of God. It was actually also a community, but very politically subversive too. But definitely the religious authorities didn't like that. And he got into a lot of conflicts with them, because they were who gave you, first of all, authority to teach, or who gave you authority to do these healings? You're totally out of our system. You're not, you're a rogue rabbi. And he was. Plus, he was using this theological, political language that they didn't like either, because they were we have a very we're religious authorities. We have a very nuanced relationship with the empire. They gave us certain legal rights. We don't criticize in certain ways, but Jesus was going around talking about, the reign of God, which was opposed to, in a sharp relief, with the empire, and was not holding back about a whole new political order that was needed, a new economic order, one that was centered around the sacred rather than around the interests of, the ruling class in Rome, who, the emperor in Rome claimed to be God. It was a very intense time, but, the emperor would, upon conquering, also be demanding that, the people who were conquered would worship an image of him, and that he would be regarded as God. They had a special agreement with Jewish people who refused to worship the emperor as God. But that was part of the whole tension. Jews are well, we're not going to do that. We have our own God, but we'll be somehow the religious authorities kind of worked out some kind of deal of, capitulation, or, something less rebellious than probably what Jesus was going for. So it's very interesting. But I thought I'd tie it back to that experience you have. Like, maybe in this exploration of Jesus, you'll find some validations for what might be called New Age, because no one's more New Age than Jesus in terms of the healings, and in terms of like the mysterious predictions or knowing someone's thoughts or reading minds. He's always doing that stuff. And it's, I think in the story, it's, if you look at it symbolically, it's like the narrative of Jesus validates folk religion. It validates the religion of the common people, what they're experiencing, how the spirit can move in mysterious ways, like outside of institutions, because I think that's just part of the way the narrative is shaped. A lot of things like cohere into the Jesus character, even more than like one person, because he kind of takes on like the mythical power, in the story. That character, so much is like put into that character that comes from all of us, or that comes from whole parts of human society. Like, so it's fine to read in too and kind of like see yourself in the character, because he's an activist, he's a community builder, he's a healer, he does miracles, he preaches. It's like he does like all these things that people do. And but it's like a validation of like he breaks boundaries, he humanizes the sick and the poor, and all these things that are so important. um and it doesn't always have to be so literal that like only he did it. There was a whole movement of people at the time, and he became a representative.
And that's been my argument about when people say he's the son of God. I'm thinking, I bet he was trying to say we're all God's children and I'm the son of God as much as you are, as much as you are, as much as you are. And people just took it and run. And it is amazing when you see somebody successful as a magician.
Yes.
And especially if you haven't tapped into your power as a magician, and we all have it, then you're going to look up to that person like they're special, that they're more special than you. And my sense is that, the masses of people were in awe as if he was unique. I think he was unique in the fact that he was tapped into it and expressing it and sharing it and putting a voice to it and owning it. But as I hear you talking about that there's lots of different characters overlapped and representing the folk people, witchcraft. I mean, witchcraft is, I want to, for those that are listening, paganism and Wiccan and witchcraft are three separate things. I'm talking about witchcraft. The archetype of the witch is somebody who's empowered in themselves and can navigate and command power from the universe. And it sounds like he was a witch, he was a magician, and everyone who can really allow the shackles and the delusion of society to fall off of them have these powers. And I think part of the life path of a mystic is to uncover the layers of falseness and projection that have been laid on us. And it's not a comfortable process. And it's made easier with the power of God and community and acceptance and love and peace. And, when society is in unrest and we are surrounded by people who might be attacking us or projecting, or we're in poverty, or we're going through illness, it's harder to tap into these things because you're dealing with that darkness. And it sounds like he was just able to stay aligned with the light. And when we can get aligned with the light, things shift and change and look different. And it sounds like he was inviting people to be there with him. And I think probably a lot of people couldn't imagine that for themselves. So they just associated it with him as an individual and not something that everyone had access to.
Very true. Although I want to share one thing that has blown my mind. Because, like, the way you're describing Jesus is bringing me all these passages in the New Testament.
Please share them.
So, one thing, for first in general, one thing that blew my mind when I was in college, that's when I got my first copy of the Bible. So I was raised Catholic, but we only heard like a few sentences of the New Testament read like each week. We never actually like read the Bible. So I assumed that when I opened the Bible and read it, it would basically be like, there'd be like a very strict rubric for how the Catholic Mass has to go, and all the doctrines and beliefs of Catholicism kind of just be written out in this book. That's what I fully expected to see. So I was like, how else would they do this with so much certainty? Well, none of that was there. A lot of the beliefs weren't there. None of the liturgies were there. None of the rules, none of the doctrines that I was so familiar with and had been taught to really memorize, none of them were in the actual Bible. And that blew my mind. And I remember reading the story, like the Gospels, which are really easy to read. They're like short, and they're originally oral traditions that would be told like in one sitting, or maybe over the course of a day or two, like in a retreat type of setting. So they're really like not even long really, or that hard to comprehend. But I remember reading those and being like, how did they not like destroy this or edit it? How is this here? And yet Christianity is like the opposite of this. How is it so strange? Like, you'll see Jesus literally saying things throughout the Gospels like everyone can do this. You just need to have faith. You could be able to move mountains, you can do greater things than I did. And he's saying we're all God's children. I mean, like, he's saying all this stuff. He's saying like we shouldn't have any hierarchy. Everyone's a brother and sister. There should be no one among my followers who claims to be greater than anyone else. It should all be. He even says specifically that you shouldn't call anyone on earth father. And I'm like, no, this can't be that we're all calling the priest father, when he specifically said, don't call anyone on earth father, because you only have one father in heaven, and we're all brothers and sisters and should be equal. I was like, how is this the basis? But it's like, it's because like what he was preaching against was like just like this dominant pattern of how humanity has structured into these pecking orders that then ate up and misappropriated him and his teachings for its own kind of style. Not to say that, I don't want to be too negative on Catholicism, because like they really do embody a lot of his teachings, like charity and compassion and many other things, but they also have that Roman Empire vibe going. And they're bringing that forward as well with the hierarchy. But just to say, like, your intuitions about Jesus are right, but then you'll be shocked if you read the actual Gospels and be like, wow, it's like right here. It's just, you'll be shocked. I believe you'll be shocked. I believe you'll be really shocked.
I'm already shocked.
Because you're expecting that like it's going to be the version of Christianity that you've seen in that book. Wow. But it will not be. It's like this story of like revolutionary love and grassroots religion and like spirituality, like anti-religion almost. It's wild. Yeah. It's wild when you read it. And that's been part of like the beauty of the Christian tradition, is that there have been like all these cool sects and movements that have started just from like somebody actually like reading the Bible, like, I'm going to try following this. It's like, wow, you're serious? If you try following this, like it's going to lead to something crazy, something new, So that's often happened. just like one person like actually like reading the actual book and being like, this is nothing about like what you guys are saying it is. I'm gonna try this.
How-
And then there's like a new religion within the religion that's born.
So how did we get here from the Bible? I'm so confused.
Well, it's a wild ride, you know. There was a point like Christianity when it began too was so different. It was illegal. The Roman Empire was capturing people, burning the Bibles. Most of Jesus's early followers were all killed because they were all like revolutionary rabble rousers, preaching the good news to the poor, lifting up the poor, winding up getting executed. So in the beginning, they were pacifists. If you became a Jesus follower, you couldn't also be a Roman soldier. You know, they were like really different. They were really different. They shared their money in common. They were like kind of like the first communists, like socialists, but all willing, not with a dictator. It was like, but they had some of these really radical practices. And it was also including like people of different religions and slaves and non-slaves. And it was a very radical community. And many leaders have also pointed out women also were more empowered in the early Jesus community. They had female leaders. It was very different from its time. But then at a certain point, as it rose in popularity, the Roman emperor kind of co-opted it and it became politicized. And, you know, he kind of bought, essentially the Roman Empire kind of like bought out the leaders and took control and then used it as an imperial religion to like crush the people they, you know, convert the people that they conquered to it, which is just antithetical, but it makes sense as an imperial form of religion. And then later they became state religions of Christianity, and they were all run by states that didn't allow for disagreement and killed so-called heretics. So it's like hundreds of years where anyone who disagreed with the dominant version would be labeled a heretic and killed. So it's like, yeah, when you have that going, that kind of like violent, controlling version of Christianity aligned with an empire or a state for so many centuries, you know, becomes, you know, warped.
And that's how our country was founded. Yeah.
Our country is largely founded with that kind of, yeah, toxic mixture of Christian supremacy, white supremacy, um, male supremacy. And yeah, I think especially in New England, but around the country, there was definitely that idea of superiority. And Christianity was used to, as an excuse to kill indigenous people and then as a way to culturally destroy them and, you know, invalidate all their practices and try to just assimilate them so that they would really effectively disappear, which is a really dark history. And for me, actually, like as I learned more about it, I was like, I don't even know if I could really do this anymore, you know, with this history and what Christianity has done and hasn't changed enough and hasn't really um, repented really. Or but there have been some who have. And I remember I was actually in an indigenous ceremony in a sweat lodge and really troubled by this and praying and listening to the sacred stones. And they somehow told me it was all right and that there was like a way to preach the gospel that would be life-giving and that would be something that I should look for. Um, and that I didn't have to like give that up in
Yeah.
order to be, um, you know, learning from indigenous people and humble and, um, you know, not in that colonist um, mindset.
That's beautiful.
Thanks.
Thank you. You know, stones have been calling me since I was a little girl. And I still have a box that says Rebecca's Rocks on it. My parents saved. I'm grateful from all the rocks I collected as a little girl. But, I did study geology in college. And, when I got more familiar with the Native American principles, how stones are our teachers as well as everything really. And, that person I shared earlier in the hour about him really wanting me to embrace the Bible and not go to hell, and that we shouldn't worship anything, other than God. And, tarot cards could get me, sent off to the hell. And that like we shouldn't be worshiping trees or stones. I just couldn't understand, because everything is God created this stuff. And then just the passage, I've seen very few passages and always out of context, like not in the Bible itself, but Googled things and seen fragments, and there seems to be so much contradiction. You should, the stars are here as a map for us, and listen to the astrologers and listen to the magicians, or don't worship anything other than the scripture. And that following astrology and following divination, or worshiping lesser gods is not the way. And for me, the relationship I have to God now isn't about worship. It's about gratitude and collaboration and communion. Not this hierarchy, although I have humility with God, but this relationship. And to me, I can't be a woman of faith without having reverence for nature. It's an extremely Jewish principle to take care of the land, take care of the environment. And it's definitely how I was raised, and it's who I am innately. Like, I am definitely a girl of the forest. And my energy and my connection to God shifts as soon as I walk out the door. I feel very differently indoors than I do outdoors, and I strive to feel connected all the time. But it's so easy outside, and to me, that's not a coincidence. I do feel like everyone has their own portal to God. That's, not everyone does it the same way. For me, nature is absolutely an open door. And I know that that's not the case for everyone. Although I often wonder if people had enough time out in nature, if that would change.
I think it does, actually. I read this article once that said, like in Oregon or something, where it's so beautiful outdoors, they have way less churches because people get their spiritual needs met just by like being outside.
Wow.
But I think what you're saying about like the earth, that's one of the important ways that I think Christianity can kind of like be improved or balanced, especially in the conversation with like Christianity and indigenous traditions. Like in the Judeo-Christian tradition, I think both in the Jewish and the Christian, it's like, where did Mother Earth go? It's like Mother Earth is like, that's like the sacred, that's like God in the earth, Mother Earth. And it's also the balance of like, in Judaism and Christianity, it was like only one God. So they went more with like Father Sky and made that the only, but then they cut out Mother Earth. So it made it more patriarchal, and then it also made it more transcendent, but then we lost the immanent and the balance. And when I'm like studying with indigenous people, I'm like, wow, they're like, look at the balance of this. Male and female is always balanced. It's never just like only male, 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 male. Like in Catholicism or Christianity, often it's like God is Father. It's like, yeah, that's a cool metaphor, but like, what about Mother? Like, where's that? How are we going to balance our lives with just male language, or just seeing God above, not seeing God, around us or in us, or in indigenous traditions, like there's all the directions that are sacred. So it really helps you orient to like the sacredness of everything around you, not just up. So I think that is one of the points where Christianity could really evolve.
Well, I just got the answer. I think it's if people are only looking up and they're not looking within, they're not looking around themselves, there's going to be a disconnection. So if people aren't embodying all of the sacred, they're going to be disillusioned, they're going to be distracted, there's going to be a distortion because they're not seeing all of it. And so people who blindly follow religion without reading the scripture, without actually checking with themselves to what feels true to them, they're not going to be walking with wholeness, with alignment and integrity with what Jesus was talking about. They just got to look down a little bit, right? And earth grounds you, brings you back down. And I also have immense gratitude for the Native Americans who are still making effort to keep their culture alive. The chief of the Massachusetts tribe told me that the only Native Americans alive today, I hope I'm not conveying this incorrectly, were those that did convert to the prayer houses. That they had to survive. I mean, the only ones that survive were the ones that would go to the praying towns and participate at church. I don't know if that's entirely true, but I think that's what he said, and he would know better than I. So it's, they're survivors too. And so much pain is there and so much trauma, and that if we just focus on the pain and trauma and the anger, we're not gonna get anywhere. So I think the Stones were talking to you and giving you the message that as long as you're connecting people to their hearts and their souls and earth and spirit, that is the way forward, and do it in whatever capacity you have access to and skills in, and that is the only way forward.
Well said. Thank you, Becca.
Oh, this is a powerful conversation.
Yeah, we're really in a flow. I'll add one thing, because with the indigenous folks that I know, Westerners had such a hard time. The colonists were so insecure, I think, that they just needed to reject indigenous traditions. And there were very few, but a few, who didn't and who were humble and who were willing to learn. American Baptist founder was one of them, Roger Williams. I'm not going to go into all that, but on the flip side, indigenous people were really open to the spiritual dialogue in a way that the colonists were not. And indigenous people, I don't want to generalize too much, but for example, in Massachusetts with the praying towns, the many indigenous leaders could see the common ground. They could see the connection around spirit. Now, it is unfortunate that they were they were under some duress to kind of find a way to survive in the relationship with the colonists. So I feel like they weren't really free to have that dialogue, really. But I think amongst indigenous people I know now, many of them are Christian. They're more religious than the colonists, and many practice both paths, or some don't, some are only in indigenous ways, and some are maybe only in Christian ways and are caught in that conflict. But there's so many indigenous people who practice both and who see the beauty in Jesus and also see the beauty in indigenous ways, and they bring them together all the time. So there's just so much more that I can learn there. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here and living in Massachusetts to try to really pay attention to how to practice Christianity or spirituality or any religion, but with like a respect to where I am and the traditions of indigenous people and like what they say, you know, when we pay attention about the world we're living in. So I'm like really want to like learn more in that direction. And I hope that, you know, all the versions of Christianity out there, you know, that people can make space to be more humble and listen and learn from other religions. And, you know, whether that's Hinduism or Judaism or indigenous faiths or Buddhism or Islam, it's really important not to be judgmental and to allow yourself to learn something because there's so much to learn. And um, it's so unfortunate when, you know, hate comes into religion. Like, we don't need to bring that level of ignorance into it. It really doesn't have to be that way. And it can be a space of learning and connection, of acceptance. Don't worry if it gets complex. Complexity isn't evil. It's okay. You know, like there can be different points of view, you know, overlapping weirdly, but you know, we just have to treat each other with respect and kindness at the end of the day. And then people can have fun with it.
Spoken, wise words spoken from a true leader.
Thanks, Becca.
Ian, thank you so much for sitting with me today and sharing all that you have. This has been really a joyful experience, a really deepening experience for me, and validating. And I'm so excited to share this conversation with people and continue the conversation with you offline and make a bigger impact in our community. Are there any other words you want to share? I feel like this has been.
Oh, I just want to say thank you. Thank you. My
Aww.
absolute pleasure. And I look forward to seeing where the seeds of this conversation lead. So thank you.
Yeah. May this be a seed. That is my prayer, both within my own spiritual journey and for everyone this can touch. If this episode touched you, if you know anyone it could benefit, please share it with them. And if you're curious about the spiritual center that Ian holds, I will put the information in the show notes, and Ian's also available for one-on-one coaching if that inspires you. And thank you for listening. Thank you for your open mind and your open heart. And may this be the beginning of even more growth for you.